August 25th, 1994, Hudson, New Hampshire. $500,000. 2 guards, both dead. And the craziest part? The killers weren't strangers, they were professionals. They had done this over 100 times before. Anthony Shea was a 30-year-old bank robber from Charlestown, Massachusetts, a 1-square-mile neighborhood that produced more armored car robbers than any place in America. On August 25th, 1994, he and 4 men hijacked an armored truck outside a savings bank, kidnapped the 2 guards, and killed them both in cold blood. But this isn't just a story about a robbery gone wrong. It's about a neighborhood where bank robbery was a family business, a code of silence that protected criminals for decades, and the FBI task force that spent 4 years breaking it all apart. One of the crew members burned the getaway car, but he forgot to crack the windows. The fire suffocated itself, and inside, the FBI found everything they needed. This is how America's most prolific robbery crew was taken down, one stupid mistake at a time. Anthony Shea grew up in the Medford Street projects of Charlestown. His father was a criminal. His uncles were criminals. His neighbors were criminals. In Charlestown, bank robbery wasn't just a crime. It was a career path. By the time he was 20, Shea had already decided what he wanted to be. Not a plumber, not an electrician, a bank robber. He later told a journalist that if he had grown up around dentists, he would have been pulling teeth. But he grew up around thieves, so he learned to steal. In the early 1980s, Shea was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Most men would come out humbled. Shea came out sharper. He swore he would never get caught again. He studied what went wrong. He analyzed every mistake. And when he got out, he recruited a crew that would become the most effective robbery operation Boston had ever seen. But what kind of crew does a convicted bank robber build? The kind that would terrify an entire region for the next 6 years. His right-hand man was Matthew McDonald. McDonald was a convicted murderer. In 1979, he killed a criminal associate in Charlestown and served 10 years of an 18-year sentence. When he got out, he linked up with Shea. McDonald was reckless, violent, and addicted to drugs, but he was fearless. And in the robbery business, that counted for something. Then there was Stephen Burke. Burke was the brains behind the crew's transition from bank robberies to armored car heists. Quiet, intelligent, and methodical. He understood that armored cars carried more cash than bank tellers ever would. The risk was higher, the guards were armed, but the payoff made it worth it. Michael O'Halloran was the ghost. His nickname was the Quiet Man because nobody ever knew he was around. He had done time in federal prison for bank robbery, and he brought a cold efficiency to every job. The 5th member was Patrick McGonigal. He was older than the rest, a fixer. His job was to set up the robberies in exchange for 10% of the take. He found the targets, studied the routes, and identified the weaknesses. Together, they formed a crew with no official name. Law enforcement would later call them the No-Name Gang. But in the early 1990s, nobody was calling them anything, because nobody was talking. Shea's crew started in March of 1990 with a simple bank robbery, a Bank of New England branch right in Charlestown. Shea and McDonald walked in, took the money, and walked out. Clean, fast. Nobody got hurt, nobody got caught. It worked, so they did it again and again. By 1991, they had hit banks in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. The scores were decent, tens of thousands per job. But Shea wanted more. Burke showed him the math. Armored cars carried 10 times what a bank teller had in her drawer. The guards were armed, yes, but that didn't scare Shea. Nothing scared Shea. The transition happened in 1992. The first armored car job netted them $600,000 from a single heist in Lynn, Massachusetts. That was more money than most people would see in a lifetime, and it took less than 5 minutes. Why would anyone stop after that? How do 5 men rob over 100 banks and armored cars without ever getting caught? The answer was Charlestown itself. 1 square mile, 15,000 people, and a code of silence that had protected criminals for over a century. Charlestown was the oldest neighborhood in Boston. It was also the most insular. Irish families had lived there for generations, crammed into the same brick row houses their grandparents had settled in during the 1840s. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone watched everyone. and nobody, under any circumstances, talked to the police. The code of silence wasn't just tradition, it was survival. Between 1975 and 1992, 33 of Charlestown's 49 murders went unsolved, a no-arrest rate double any other Boston neighborhood. Witnesses disappeared. Memories vanished. The police could knock on every door and walk away with nothing. For Shea and his crew, this was their fortress. Surveillance was nearly impossible. FBI agents stood out immediately. The streets were narrow, the community tight, and strangers were spotted within minutes. Even when agents approached residents directly, the response was always the same. Code of silence. Get out of here, cop. But what happens when an entire neighborhood decides to protect its criminals? How do you build a case when nobody will talk? By 1992, Boston was experiencing armored car robberies at a staggering rate. 16 per year, on average, 3 times more than most states. 1 in 5 armored car heists in the entire country happened in the Boston area. And the FBI knew exactly where the thieves were coming from. But knowing and proving were two very different things. The FBI's Boston field office responded by forming a specialized bank robbery task force. Whenever an armored car was hit, they got the call. Armed criminals meant innocent people could get hurt at any moment. And these criminals weren't amateurs. The task force put Shea and his crew under surveillance, but it was a nightmare. Charlestown was only 1 square mile. An unfamiliar car parked for more than an hour would get noticed. An unfamiliar face in a bar would get reported. FBI agents might as well have worn signs around their necks. And the task force had other problems. Shea's crew wasn't the only group robbing armored cars in Boston. Multiple investigations were running simultaneously. The surveillance squad would be watching Shea one week and chasing a different crew the next. During those gaps, the no-name gang would strike again. After the $600,000 heist in Lynn in 1992, the crew took down another armored car in Seabrook, New Hampshire in 1993, then 2 more around Boston in January and March of 1994. The FBI tracked the pattern. After a big score, the crew would go quiet for a few months. When the money started running low, they would hit again, like clockwork. What made Shea's crew so difficult to catch, and how long could the code of silence actually hold? The crew treated robbery like a profession. Every job was planned weeks in advance. Every detail was rehearsed. It started with surveillance. McGonigal or Shea would visit the target location days before the robbery. They sat in nearby diners. They watched the armored car routes. They timed the deliveries. On the day of the job, the crew used stolen vehicles. They parked in handicap spots near the front door because that was where the armored car always stopped. The guards wanted minimal time between the truck and the building. The crew knew this. They wore full Halloween masks that completely obscured their faces. They wore gloves. They stripped the seats out of their assault vehicle, usually a minivan, to make room for the crew. They darkened the windows. When the armored car arrived, the attack was fast and overwhelming. One man gained control of the courier. A second disarmed the courier. A third disarmed the driver. The whole thing lasted under a minute. After each robbery, the getaway car was taken to a remote location and set on fire. Any forensic evidence, fingerprints, hair, DNA, went up in flames. But the crew went even further. They obtained hair clippings from barbershop floors and scattered them inside the vehicles to contaminate any remaining evidence. Who thinks of that? What kind of criminal mind plants fake DNA at a crime scene? After each job, the crew met to divide the money and critique their performance. If someone made a serious mistake, they paid a fine. This was a business, and they ran it like one. They called themselves the Minutemen because of how fast they worked. In and out of a bank in under 60 seconds. Shea would head straight for the vault. McDonald would scoop cash from the teller drawers. A third man would hold the floor with a stopwatch, calling out the time. 45 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds. Time to go. By night, think about it. Over 100 robberies, millions of dollars, not a single arrest. Could any crew really keep that record forever? Drop your prediction below and subscribe because you are going to want to see what happens next. It was time for the biggest job yet. August 25th, 1994, a Thursday morning, Hudson, New Hampshire, a small town just south of the Massachusetts border. 9:15 a.m., a Northeast armored transport truck pulled into the parking lot of the NFS Savings Bank on Lowell Road. Inside were two guards, Ronald Normando, 52 years old, from Bow, and Lawrence Johnson, 57 years old, from Epping. Both were family men. Both were just doing their jobs. In the parking lot, a Chevy Lumina minivan sat waiting. The windows were darkened. Inside, 4 masked men lay flat on the floor, armed, ready. The courier, Normando, exited the armored truck and walked toward the bank. 9:20 a.m. The minivan doors flew open. 4 men in gray jumpsuits and black ski masks spilled out. The first robber reached Normando before he could react. He was grabbed, thrown against the side of the minivan, and shot. Then he was dragged inside the van. A second robber leaped into the back of the armored truck and came face to face with Johnson. Johnson fought back. He grappled with the attacker and managed to pull off his ski mask. Did the robber see what just happened? Did he realize someone had just seen his face? The unmasked robber was Stephen Burke, and he panicked. He slammed a weapon into Johnson and forced him into submission. 9:25 a.m. The crew had control of the armored truck and both guards. But the plan was already falling apart. Normando was wounded. Burke's face had been exposed. Nothing about this was going the way it was supposed to. The crew drove the armored truck and the minivan 2 miles east to a clearing off Pelham Road, a long, quiet back road with nothing but trees and a dirt path leading into the woods. A yellow rental truck was waiting there as the getaway vehicle. They transferred the cash from the armored truck to the rental truck. The take was roughly $500,000, but money was no longer the biggest problem. Ronald Normando was alive. Wounded, restrained with duct tape, but alive. He was asking them to let him go. Michael O'Halloran taped his hands and ankles. He tried to reassure him that everything was going to be okay. But then the decision was made. Burke's mask had been pulled off. The guards had seen faces. They knew the crew was from Charlestown. They could identify them. What happened next would turn a robbery into a double homicide. Both guards were killed, and in an effort to ensure that no single member of the crew could ever turn on the others, each man fired a shot. Every member was now equally guilty. Nobody could talk without incriminating themselves. The crew drove away. They left behind the armored truck, the minivan, and the bodies of 2 innocent men on a dirt path in the New Hampshire woods. But here's the thing about murder. It changes everything. The code of silence was built to protect thieves. Would it protect killers? For a few hours, the no-name gang thought they had gotten away with it again. They drove back to Massachusetts. They split the money. They went home. The code of silence would protect them, just like it always had. But something was different this time. 2 men were dead, and in a small town like Hudson, that changed everything. 10:30 a.m. A mechanic at a nearby vehicle dump spotted the yellow rental truck and a white car leaving the woods. He called the police. Hudson PD arrived to the most violent crime scene in the town's history. Rather than drive down the dirt path and risk destroying evidence, officers cut through the woods on foot. Detective Ray Mello was one of the first to respond. He found Normando's body first, restrained, shot. Then the armored truck, Johnson inside. The scene was devastating. Even veteran investigators were shaken. The FBI descended within hours. The task force had been tracking Shea's crew for nearly 2 years. They had suspected them of dozens of armored car robberies, but they had never had enough evidence for an arrest. This time was different. The crew had been rattled by the violence, and rattled criminals make mistakes. They left behind a ski mask in the armored truck. They left footprints on the dirt path. They left tire tracks on the side of Pelham Road. The task force brought in a renowned composite sketch artist to interview witnesses near both the bank and the dump site. The artist had a theory. A crew this professional wouldn't go into a place cold. They would case it for days beforehand. So he went to the local diner and asked the waitresses a simple question. Had they seen a group of unfamiliar faces coming in recently? The answer was yes. Waitresses remember their regulars. They know who orders the poached egg with black coffee. A new group of men sticking around for hours? They noticed. And their descriptions matched Anthony Shea and his crew. The task force had a positive link, but they needed physical evidence. And they needed the rental truck. And then there was the car. Remember that getaway car? the one they were supposed to burn, Matty McDonald was in charge of that job. He set the car on fire in a parking lot in Revere, Massachusetts, but he made one critical error. He closed all the windows before lighting the fire. The flames consumed the oxygen inside the sealed car and went out. The fire suffocated itself. What if he had cracked just one window? Would they have gotten away with murder? When police found the car the next morning, it was barely damaged. Inside the trunk, they found charred checks from New Hampshire banks, money bags, jumpsuits, and a t-shirt with a Boston Leprechaun logo. That logo belonged to a softball team at a federal prison in Virginia. A former member of that team, Anthony Shea. One closed window. That was all it took to crack the case wide open. The FBI now had a direct link to Shea, but they needed more. They started with the rental truck. The mechanic who had seen it leaving the woods turned out to be an extraordinary witness. He had worked on engines his entire life. He gave investigators not just a description of the truck, but a description of the engine type. It was a cab-over design, where the cab sits directly over the engine. A New Hampshire state trooper searched the yellow pages and found that only one rental company in the entire region rented cab-over trucks, and one had been rented just before the robbery. The truck was due back the following day. Investigators put a Massachusetts state trooper undercover as a rental company employee. But whoever was driving that truck would be jittery after the botched robbery. He was now a wanted killer. What would happen if he spotted the undercover officer? The next day, the truck pulled into the lot. Patrick McGonigal stepped out. The same McGonigal who was a known associate of Shea and McDonald. The FBI let him walk. They impounded the truck instead. Forensic technicians went over every inch of it. Special Agent Charlie Walsh found what they were looking for: a fingerprint on the side door molding. It was run through the FBI's fingerprint database. The print belonged to Stephen Burke. They matched the tire from the rental truck to the cast taken at the crime scene. The match was conclusive. They had the right vehicle. 2 crew members tied to the Hudson murders, physical evidence linking the truck to the dump site, and a half-burned car full of damning evidence. But the FBI wanted more. They wanted the entire crew, and they wanted to use the heaviest charge available: RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. The same federal statute used to bring down the mafia. A RICO conviction meant life sentences, no parole, no deals, the end of the line. But RICO cases required proving a pattern of criminal enterprise. That meant connecting not just the Hudson murders, but every robbery the crew had committed. It would take time, patience, and at least one person willing to break the code of silence. In the meantime, the crew was laying low. After Hudson, they knew they had gone too far. They stashed their cash and spent it slowly, the most disciplined the crew had ever been. Several months after Hudson, McDonald was arrested on a parole violation and sent back to prison in New Hampshire. With McDonald locked up, the crew was vulnerable, but the code of silence still held. Nobody was talking. Could the FBI find a crack in Charlestown's wall of silence? And what would it take to make someone finally talk? The challenge was finding someone willing to break the code of silence. And in Charlestown, that was nearly impossible. Lead investigator Larry Travolia had an idea. He targeted Stephen Connolly, a mid-level drug dealer who supplied both Shea and McDonald. When Connolly was arrested on unrelated charges, Travolia went to work on his girlfriend. She was 7 months pregnant and alone. Agents checked in on her regularly. If she needed $20 for milk, they gave it to her. Slowly, over weeks and months, she started to trust them. She convinced Connolly to talk, and Connolly knew everything. He had information on almost every bank and armored car robbery the crew had committed over the previous 7 years. But knowing the crimes and proving them were 2 different things. Could Connolly get the crew to incriminate themselves on tape? The FBI transferred Connolly to the same prison as Matty McDonald. They put a wire on him. Connolly walked the yard and engaged McDonald in conversation. McDonald couldn't help himself. He admitted to screwing up the car fire. He talked about the Hudson job. He said he didn't mind going to jail for it, as long as it wasn't because of a mistake he had made. The irony was staggering. It was exactly his mistake that had started it all. With 3 crew members linked to the murders, the FBI began building their RICO case. But they still needed Shea. Anthony Shea couldn't stop robbing. It was in his blood. Nearly a year after the Hudson killings, while the FBI had him under surveillance, Shea stole a Jeep Cherokee. There was only one reason to steal a vehicle. A new job was coming. Remember, the FBI had been watching him for months. Did Shea have any idea how close they were? Agents followed the Jeep from Braintree through downtown Boston to a hotel parking lot in Peabody, north of the city. They obtained a court order to install a microphone and listening device inside the vehicle. For days, the surveillance team watched as Shea and two accomplices cased banks. They kept coming back to one location, a bank in Wakefield. Friday afternoon, 2 p.m., the surveillance team reported movement. Shea and his crew were on the move. Two vehicles, a Jeep Cherokee and a Ford Bronco. They drove toward Wakefield in tandem. An FBI SWAT team followed them every step of the way. The tricky part was timing. If the SWAT team moved too early, Shea could claim he was never going to rob the bank. If they moved too late, Shea would be inside with hostages. How close do you let a man with a submachine gun get to a building full of innocent people? The Bronco parked half a mile from the bank. One person stayed behind. Shea and another accomplice continued toward the target in the Jeep. They pulled into the bank parking lot, slowly, watching. Inside the bugged vehicle, agents heard every word. "You're going to go straight to the teller." "All right, it's on." The SWAT team moved in. Vehicles converged on the parking lot from every direction. Inside the Jeep, one of the crew spotted them. He said something. Shea looked up. "Feds." It was over. The SWAT team surrounded the vehicle. One of the accomplices had a submachine gun. The takedown was chaotic but controlled. When the dust settled, an agent pulled off the driver's mask. Anthony Shea, handcuffed, done. What goes around comes around. For once, he wasn't in control. It took another 10 months to build cases against the rest of the crew. On the morning of the roundup, FBI agents hit every target simultaneously. One by one, the members of the no-name gang were checked off the list. When McGonigal was arrested, investigators put Hudson police handcuffs on his wrists, a symbolic gesture for a town that had been devastated by the murders. A message to the people of Hudson. We didn't give up. We brought him to justice. But would a jury convict them? Would the code of silence hold in a courtroom? September 16, 1997. The trial began in federal court in Concord, New Hampshire. The case lasted 3 months. Over 150 witnesses testified, including 9 former Charlestown criminals who broke the code of silence. The most devastating moment came when John Burke, Stephen Burke's own brother, took the stand and testified against him. Brother against brother, the code of silence shattered. December 22, 1997, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. Anthony Shea, Matthew McDonald, Stephen Burke, and Michael O'Halloran were convicted of racketeering, conspiracy, and dozens of armed robbery charges connected to 55 crimes in 4 states. Each was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Patrick McGonigal, who was not present at the Hudson robbery, was convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 30 years. He died behind bars in 2009. The irony of the sentencing date was not lost on anyone. The federal 3 strikes law that guaranteed life sentences for violent repeat offenders had been signed by President Clinton on August 25, 1994, the exact same day as the Hudson murders. The no-name gang committed over 100 armed robberies across 4 states and stole millions of dollars. They were the most prolific robbery crew in American history, and they were taken down not by brilliant detective work alone, but by their own mistakes. A car fire that didn't burn, a window that wasn't cracked, a fingerprint on a door, and a code of silence that finally broke. Charlestown has changed since the 1990s. The old projects are gone. Young professionals have moved in. The neighborhood that once produced more armored car robbers than anywhere in America is now one of Boston's most desirable places to live. But the story of Anthony Shea and the no-name gang lives on. It inspired the novel Prince of Thieves by Chuck Hogan, and the hit movie The Town, written and directed by Ben Affleck. To this day, Anthony Shea remains in federal prison. In a 2023 court hearing, he told a judge he was sorry for the way he had lived his life. He said he wished he could take it all back. He wanted his daughter to be proud of him. He wanted to see his grandson grow up. But the families of Ronald Normando and Lawrence Johnson asked the court one simple question. If Shay had truly changed, why wouldn't he reveal who pulled the trigger on August 25th? The code of silence, it seems, never fully dies. And that brings us to the end of our story. If you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe and activate the bell button so you can receive new videos.